What Queen Camilla realised behind the heavy oak doors of Buckingham Palace was not delivered with a shout, but with the terrifying silence of an electronic security pass that no longer granted access. For decades, she had played the longest, most calculated game in modern royal history, moving methodically from the shadows of a broken marriage into the absolute centre of the British monarchy. But when a senior protocol officer politely directed her toward a secondary side entrance, bypassing the grand steps where the international press stood, waiting the illusion of her absolute power collapsed in an instant. This was the moment she understood that the machinery of the crown does not belong to the person wearing the crown today, but to the institution that endures tomorrow. By the end of this video, you will understand the hidden mechanics of a quiet palace coup that the public was never supposed to see. We will unpack the secret desperate power grab Camilla attempted during a period of profound royal vulnerability, how Prince William and Princess Anne uncovered the administrative paper trail and the silent, ruthless retaliation that followed. You will see how the House of Windsor used its oldest weapon administrative protocol to execute a devastating public humiliation, forcing Camilla to face the coldest realization of all that despite her titles, her tiaras, and her decades of manipulation, she actually owns nothing. To understand how hard this fall hit, we must first look at the immense fortress of influence Camilla had built around herself. For 30 years, her life was a masterclass in PR, rehabilitation, and strategic patience. She had successfully navigated the intense public hatred of the 1990s, systematically eroded the saintly memory of Princess Diana within the palace walls, and quietly replaced Diana's loyalists with her own trusted allies. When King Charles ascended the throne, Camilla's victory appeared total. She was no longer the mistress or the companion. She was the queen consort holding the ultimate proximity to the fountain of honor. With Charles completely dependent on her emotional support, especially during his recent health battles, Camilla began to operate with a dangerous level of confidence. She believed her position was untouchable, protected by the absolute devotion of a reigning monarch. She began utilizing her elevated status to subtly advance her own non-royal children, Tom and Laura, positioning them closer to royal events and attempting to integrate her own bloodline into spaces traditionally reserved for the inner core of the Windsor family. For a brief moment in royal history, Camilla looked upon the vast estates, the priceless art collections and the ancient protocols, and believed she had finally won. But that detail matters because in the British monarchy, the illusion of power is often at its brightest right before it is completely dismantled. The trigger for this institutional warfare began during a period of deep crisis for the royal family, specifically when Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was forced to step back from public life to focus on her health. With the institution facing a severe shortage of working royals and King Charles undergoing treatment, a massive power vacuum opened at the heart of the palace. Camilla saw this vacuum not as a crisis to be managed with humility, but as a window of opportunity to permanently secure her legacy. Behind closed doors, Camilla began initiating a series of subtle but profound administrative changes. She attempted to secure long-term financial guarantees for her own children, rewriting agreements regarding the use of royal properties, and trying to alter future regency protocols. What appeared to be routine administrative updates were actually a calculated attempt to ensure that even after King Charles's reign ended, her influence and her family's elevated status would remain legally protected. She sought to establish a permanent court of her own, one that could not be easily dissolved when the crown inevitably passed to the next generation. However, Camilla made a fatal psychological error. She mistook the quiet grief and protective restraint of Prince William for weakness. While William was managing the profound emotional weight of his wife's illness and his father's diagnosis, he was also quietly observing the shifting dynamics within the palace walls. William's devotion to his mother, Princess Diana, had never faded. It had simply been institutionalized into a fierce, protective loyalty to Catherine and the future of his own children. He recognized that Camilla's maneuvers were not just an administrative power grab. They were an insult to his mother's memory and a direct threat to Catherine's rightful legacy. The discovery of Camilla's plan did not happen through a dramatic confrontation, but through the forensic analysis of palace paperwork. Prince William, working in tandem with Princess Anne, the ultimate gatekeeper of royal discipline, began reviewing the internal payroll security clearances and revised schedules passing through the Lord Chamberlain's office. Princess Anne, with her decades of institutional knowledge, immediately spotted the anomalies. Camilla's allies were quietly being granted specialized security passes, and requests were being made to shift funding allocations from the Duchy of Lancaster into accounts that bypassed standard oversight. The retaliation from William and Anne was immediate, silent, and devastatingly precise. There were no arguments, no leaks to the tabloids, and no public scenes. Instead, they weaponized the very system Camilla had tried to manipulate. William utilized his immense legal and financial authority as the Duke of Cornwall to quietly lock down the royal estates, while Anne systematically revoked the specialized security clearances that Camilla's inner circle had just obtained. Within 48 hours, the administrative network Camilla had spent months building was completely erased, replaced by staff who answered strictly to the Prince of Wales. The visual humiliation that followed was designed to send a chilling message to Camilla and the entire royal court. When Camilla arrived for a major state function expecting to take her place at the center of the world stage, she found the palace geography had completely changed. Her personal portrait, which she had recently ordered to be displayed in a prominent waiting room where foreign dignitaries were received, had been quietly removed and placed back into deep storage. In its place hung a striking historic portrait of Princess Diana, an unmistakable psychological message that the past had not been forgotten. But the final crushing blow occurred when Camilla approached the grand entrance of the palace. A senior household official acting under direct orders from the Prince of Wales's office informed her that due to revised security and logistical protocols, her vehicle was being redirected. She was not to enter through the front gates, where the global media was stationed, a privilege now strictly reserved for the direct bloodline of the king and the returning Princess of Wales. Instead, Camilla was forced to exit her vehicle and walk through a secondary side door, hidden from public view, completely isolated from the grandeur she believed she owned, as she stood in the quiet corridor inside that side entrance. Realizing that her orders were being ignored by her own staff, the true depth of her isolation became clear. The trap had snapped shut. She had spent 30 years climbing to the absolute peak of the British monarchy, only to discover that the moment she reached for true institutional power, the system simply reset itself around her. She looked around for support, realizing that every administrative path forward was blocked by the silent, unyielding wall of Prince William and Princess Anne. The true weight of an institutional coup is never measured by the noise it creates, but by the echoes of what remains unsaid. As Queen Camilla stood in that isolated corridor, listening to the distant murmur of a palace event she was meant to dominate, the sudden shift in her reality was absolute. The side door was not just a temporary logistical detour, it was a permanent reassignment of her status. For decades, she had operated under the assumption that her proximity to King Charles made her untouchable, believing that the power she wielded through his affection was identical to the power of the crown itself. But that is where the story changes, because she had failed to realize that the British monarchy is fundamentally a corporation of continuity, one that ruthlessly protects its future assets at the expense of its temporary occupants. When Camilla finally managed to secure a private audience with King Charles inside the private quarters later that evening, she expected the absolute defense he had always provided her. For over 30 years, Charles had broken convention, defied his mother, and risked his own public standing to shield her from the consequences of her actions. But when she presented the reality of what William and Anne had done, describing the systemic removal of her allies and the sudden cancellation of her administrative initiatives, she was met with a devastating, heavy silence. The king, visibly exhausted by his ongoing health battles and deeply focused on the fragile stability of his own reign, simply looked away. That detail matters immensely because Charles's silence was not an act of active betrayal, but an act of profound institutional surrender. He understood what Camilla refused to accept, that the power dynamics within the House of Windsor had fundamentally shifted, with his own illness forcing a realistic look at the future. The machinery of the palace had already begun the process of transitioning toward the next generation. Charles knew that any attempt to override the decisions made by Prince William and Princess Anne would not protect Camilla. It would only expose his own diminished leverage and trigger a civil war within the palace that the crown could not afford to lose. In that moment of absolute silence, Camilla realized that the ultimate protector she had relied upon for half her life was no longer capable of saving her from the future. This psychological climax immediately exposed the underlying reality of Camilla's position, exposing what can only be described as a state of commercial desperation. To the outside world, she is surrounded by the ultimate symbols of billionaire PR, appearing in priceless family heirlooms and residing in historic fortresses. But when you look beneath the surface of the administrative protocol, the broke reality of her personal empire becomes starkly visible. Camilla owns no crown property. She does not control the immense revenues of the Duchy of Lancaster, nor does she have any legal claim to the vast wealth generated by the Duchy of Cornwall. The grand estates she occupies are held in strict sovereign trust, and she is entirely dependent on the financial allocations approved by the reigning monarch and monitored by the state. Her recent secret attempts to rewrite financial agreements and secure long-term, independent funding for her non-royal children were driven not by greed, but by the cold realization of her own vulnerability. Tom and Laura have no official standing within the royal family. They receive no state funding, and they will inherit absolutely nothing from the Crown Estate when Charles's reign ends. Camilla sought to use the current transition period to carve out permanent financial guarantees for her bloodline, hoping to establish a legacy that Prince William could not easily dismantle. But because William controls the Duchy of Cornwall, an absolute multi-billion-pound financial empire, he was able to quietly block every single one of her initiatives without ever needing to make a public statement. Not because he wanted a public feud, but because he was enforcing the strict, unyielding laws of royal preservation. The message sent by William and Anne was devastatingly clear. Camilla is an institutional tenant, not an owner. The moment King Charles is no longer on the throne, her access to the sovereign wealth and the grand palaces vanishes instantly. She will be entirely dependent on the financial goodwill of a stepson who remembers every single detail of the suffering his mother endured during the collapse of his parents' marriage. By shutting down her financial maneuvers now, William effectively ensured that Camilla's non-royal bloodline remains permanently excluded from the future of the British monarchy, stripping away her ability to establish a rival court. While Camilla's empire was being dismantled in the shadows, the front gates of the palace opened wide to signal the rise of the new order. The highly anticipated return of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, to the public stage was not just a moment of emotional relief for the public, it was a masterclass in strategic PR restoration. For months, Camilla had attempted to position herself as the steady, stabilizing force of the monarchy during a time of crisis. But the moment Catherine stepped back into the light, the contrast was devastating. Catherine's return was characterized by a silent, uncomplaining dignity that immediately captured the global imagination, reminding the world exactly what a future queen looks like. Every subtle shift in the layout of recent royal events was designed to reinforce this restoration of Diana's legacy through Catherine. Viewers noticed how Catherine was positioned at the absolute center of the royal family's presentation, frequently wearing historic pieces of jewelry that were directly associated with Queen Elizabeth and Princess Diana. These choices were not mere fashion statements, they were forensic proof of a shifting hierarchy. The placement of Diana's portrait in the prominent waiting room, replacing the newly ordered image of Camilla, was the ultimate symbolic confirmation that the institution had decided to honor its true lineage. The palace was openly declaring that the future belongs to William and Catherine, and that Camilla's decades of careful manipulation had failed to alter the fundamental DNA of the monarchy. What looked like a routine administrative update over the past several weeks was actually a total dismantling of Camilla's empire, leaving her with the title of queen, but none of the actual power that usually accompanies it. She remains a public figurehead, performing her duties with a practiced smile. But behind closed doors, she knows that the trap has completely closed. Every request she makes must now pass through an administrative system controlled entirely by the Prince of Wales's loyalists. Her schedule is monitored, her finances are restricted, and her ability to influence the king is systematically checked by Princess Anne's strict enforcement of protocol. This story resonates far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace because it exposes the ultimate limitation of strategic manipulation when it faces the cold reality of a true institution. Camilla spent a lifetime playing a brilliant game of chess, navigating public hatred, media warfare, and family resistance to reach the absolute summit of British society. Yet the moment she reached for permanent institutional power, the system simply reset itself around her, proving that titles are temporary, but the bloodline is permanent. She is left with the grand titles and the glittering tiaras. But she is fully aware that she holds them only on a short-term lease, surrounded by a new generation that is simply waiting for the clock to run out. As the dynamics within the House of Windsor continue to evolve, the public is left to watch the subtle, silent clues that reveal the true state of the monarchy. The hidden warfare, The side door exits and the vanished portraits tell a story of an institution that is quietly but ruthlessly preparing for its next chapter, leaving those who try to exploit its vulnerability completely isolated in the shadows of the past. What do you think about the silent power shift currently taking place behind palace doors? And how do you view Prince William's strategic handling of his family's legacy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep analytical insights into the hidden mechanics of the world's most powerful institutions.